In Japan, 1 million young men have vanished behind closed doors. They are not dead, but they have withdrawn from the visible world, sealing themselves inside their rooms as if performing a quiet act of protest. They no longer seek love, sex, or even friendship. They no longer wish to play the game. In the United States, 1 out of every 3 men under 30 has not had an intimate relationship in the past year, a figure that has tripled in just a decade. In China, millions join the Tang Ping movement, literally lying flat, opting out of the race for marriage, success, and romantic achievement. And yet, while desire itself seems to be evaporating, dating apps record profits. Tinder, worth tens of billions, thrives on the illusion of connection, while the men who feed it report a matching rate barely above zero. We are witnessing a paradox so massive that statistics alone can no longer contain its meaning. Something deeper is collapsing, not libido, but belief. The official diagnoses sound familiar: addiction to video games, fear of commitment, generational immaturity. But these explanations are too small for the magnitude of what is unfolding. The Korean philosopher Byung-Chul Han offers another interpretation, one that cuts far deeper. What we are witnessing, he suggests, is the first mass emotional strike in human history. It is not apathy, but refusal. Not incapacity, but rebellion. The men who are withdrawing are not running away from women. They are escaping from a field of battle where love itself has become a mechanism of psychic extraction. In the age of neoliberal effect, every relationship is a site of production, and every self a factory of feelings. The modern man, exhausted from decades of emotional labor, is no longer willing to be both the product and the producer of intimacy. The numbers that once seemed sociological now read like the symptoms of a civilizational breakdown. As women demand greater emotional labor from their partners, a demand born not from malice, but from their own exhaustion with a system that grants them freedom only through endless self-improvement, men respond with the silence of those who have realized the negotiation is impossible. They are not retreating from love, but from the performance of invulnerability demanded by a world that simultaneously insists on vulnerability. They are fleeing from emotional vampirism disguised as intimacy, from the expectation that they must become unpaid therapists for others' traumas while their own wounds are dismissed as toxic masculinity. They are running from relationships where every boundary they set is framed as violence, but every boundary they receive must be sacred. The question few dare to ask is brutally simple. What happens when an entire generation of men discovers that peace is worth more than love? The self-help industry already has its answers. Peter Pan's syndrome, fear of commitment, emotional unavailability. The same recycled diagnoses fill digital pages every month. Why modern men don't want serious relationships, how to make him open up, how to help him heal. The prescriptions never change: more therapy, more vulnerability, more emotional labor. The solution is always individual, never systemic. Yet this narrative hides a devastating truth. One Han exposes mercilessly. Romantic love has been colonized by the logic of neoliberal performance. We no longer love, we optimize. We no longer connect, we invest. We no longer share, we transact. The modern man is not afraid of commitment. He is afraid of becoming a full-time emotional employee without contract or compensation, where every day is a performance review and dismissal arrives through a text message. The emotional economy has become a trillion-dollar industry. Dating apps, love coaches, couples retreats. Each sells the illusion of abundance while thriving on scarcity. Every swipe is a promise of a better version, a more optimized encounter. Women receive hundreds of matches daily. Men, desperate for validation, rewrite biographies, hire photographers, and brand themselves like startups seeking investment. Courtship has turned into a pitch meeting. The man must sell himself as a viable, scalable emotional product with guaranteed return on investment. What few realize is that this asymmetry is not accidental. It is design. Effective capitalism needs hungry men competing for crumbs of validation, feeding an algorithm that converts their loneliness into profit. Han once described our age as the society of fatigue. In the realm of relationships, that fatigue becomes cruelty. The modern man lives in a state of chronic affective burnout. It is not only that he must work 50 hours a week to survive economically. He must spend the remaining 118 hours working on his romantic value. Gym sessions to keep his body competitive. Therapy to prove emotional intelligence. Interesting hobbies to appear multidimensional. Performed vulnerability to prove he is not toxic. Stoic strength to prove he is not weak. Masculinity has become a full-time job with no vacations, no retirement, and no appreciation. Since childhood, the programming begins. At 5, boys don't cry. At 10, protect your sister. At 15, a real man pays the bill. At 20, without work, you are nothing. At 30, if you can't support a family, what kind of man are you? This lifelong script creates what Han calls the achievement subject, a being who has so internalized his productive function that his worth is indistinguishable from his capacity to provide, protect, and perform. The modern woman, partially liberated from her domestic cage, may choose to be a professional, a mother, both, or neither. The modern man still has only one socially validated choice: to produce or to disappear. But Han identifies an even more insidious phenomenon: compulsory transparency as a new form of violence. The contemporary man must constantly expose his inner world, his fears, insecurities, traumas, to prove he is emotionally literate. Yet this exposure does not generate intimacy. It generates data. Every confession becomes information that can later be weaponized. You told me your father left you becomes that's why you're emotionally distant. Male vulnerability, far from being received with compassion, is archived like forensic evidence for future trials. What was meant to build closeness becomes ammunition in the next argument. The result is a landscape of relational paranoia where self-disclosure feels like walking into a courtroom without defense. Emotional labor, once a sociological term coined to describe the forced cheerfulness of flight attendants, has mutated into something monstrous. In the neoliberal romance, it means the male obligation to process, contain, and solve his partner's emotions while his own are minimized. He must be the therapist who listens to stories of ex-lovers for hours, the emotional container absorbing professional anxieties, the human stabilizer regulating another adult's moods. But when he seeks the same space for himself, he finds his pain uncomfortable, his sadness unattractive, his exhaustion interpreted as weakness. Here lies the psychic cannibalism of modern intimacy, a systematic extraction of emotional resources without reciprocity. And yet, the woman, too, is trapped. She is told to be empowered but soft, independent but desirable, strong but delicate. She, too, is a victim of a system that demands impossible coherence. Overwhelmed by her own contradictions, she often unloads them onto her partner without awareness. Both are exhausted, but only one is socially allowed to express it. Han calls this the toxic positivity of love, the belief that relationships must be perpetual sources of happiness, growth, and satisfaction. Instagram shows couples in endless vacations. Rom-coms promise eternal bliss. Self-help books sell formulas for conscious relationships. Any moment of neutrality, doubt, or fatigue is read as failure. Love has ceased to be a state of being. It has become a project complete with KPIs, quarterly evaluations, and emotional performance metrics. This economy of affection creates what Han names the hell of the same. Relationships where both parties are entrepreneurs of the self, negotiating emotional contracts instead of encountering each other. Genuine meeting becomes impossible because the other no longer exists. Only two self-brands exchanging value. Sex becomes a transaction of validation. Conversation becomes emotional networking. Conflict becomes a negotiation where someone must surrender psychological equity. Intimacy itself becomes work. We must schedule date nights, program deep conversations, plan spontaneity. What was once natural now demands management. The vocabulary of modern love has militarized itself. Gaslighting, love bombing, narcissist, manipulator, clinical terms stripped to precision, now used as rhetorical weapons. A man sets a boundary, gaslighting. He disagrees, narcissism. He asks for space, avoidance disorder. He requests reciprocity, emotional manipulation. Pop psychology has armed a generation with diagnostic tools that turn every incompatibility into pathology and every argument into abuse. The result is what Han foresaw as surveillance intimacy. Relationships where every word is potential evidence, every silence a symptom, every gesture a clue to be dissected. Men report walking on eggshells, self-censoring before speaking, recording conversations in their minds for fear that anything said today will be resurrected months later, out of context, reinterpreted as violence. The market's proposed solutions are grotesque parodies of healing. Conscious masculinity retreats for thousands of dollars, where burnt-out executives practice radical vulnerability before strangers. Dating coaches selling high-value man techniques, turning courtship into algorithmic manipulation. Books on nonviolent communication that often translate to the suppression of dissent. Therapists who charge hundreds per hour to explain that his exhaustion is resistance to growth. The cruelest distortion is the weaponization of male vulnerability itself. For decades, men were told, open up, express your emotions, cry if you need to. But when they finally do, they discover the trap. Their tears become unattractive weakness. Their fears become future ammunition. Their openness becomes loss of respect. A 2023 study found that over 70% of men who displayed emotional vulnerability in relationships later had it used against them. This is the paradox of modern masculinity. He must be feminist, but masculine, protective, but not paternalistic, a provider, but not patriarchal, vulnerable, but not weak, sensitive, but not soft, confident, but not arrogant. Each command cancels the previous one, forming a psychological minefield where every movement is wrong. The women, caught in their own impossible dualities, project frustration onto men who can never fulfill mutually exclusive expectations. The male retreat, therefore, is not cowardice. It is the first unconscious emotional strike in history. When 19th century industrial workers faced inhuman conditions, they did not ask for permission to stop the machines. They simply stopped. The men of the 21st century are doing something similar, halting the romantic machine that grinds them psychologically while blaming them for bleeding. Han reminds us that every symptom is a message. The Japanese hikikomori locked in his room is not a failure, but an involuntary monk protesting against a society demanding infinite performance. The herbivore man who rejects sex is not asexual, but on strike against a system that turned intimacy into Olympic competition. The Western man who goes his own way does not hate women. He is exercising the only power left to him, the power not to participate. This mass withdrawal reveals what corporate feminism refuses to acknowledge. Patriarchy did not only oppress women, it also destroyed men in a different way. It turned them into economic and emotional machinery, atlases holding a world that despises them for holding it. What we call toxic masculinity is often the traumatic symptom of generations forced to amputate their humanity to survive. The man who cannot cry is not an oppressor. He is emotionally mutilated. The dark brilliance of neoliberalism was to turn this mutilation into privilege. Yes, men earn more, but they also kill themselves 4 times more, die 5 years earlier, and represent 90% of workplace deaths. Their privilege is to die producing. Their power is to sacrifice in silence. Their advantage is to be forbidden from failing. When they desert the romantic game, they're not rejecting women. They're rejecting the psychic bloodletting required to maintain a masculinity they never chose. What we are witnessing is not a crisis of masculinity, but its awakening. For the first time in history, A generation of men is collectively saying no to the social contract that turns them into beasts of emotional burden. It is not misogyny. It is the recognition that love under late capitalism has become another form of exploitation, only now disguised with flowers and chocolates. Conscious women are beginning to understand this too. They are tired of evaluating, demanding, performing empowerment while secretly longing simply to be. The system turned them into emotional managers of relationships no one enjoys managing. Their exhaustion is real, their frustration valid, but directing anger at the men who walk away is like blaming the factory workers for the collapse of the plant. The reclamation of male emotional sovereignty begins with a radical act: the right to peace without justification. Not peace as absence of conflict, but peace as presence of self. Around the world, men are rediscovering the inner monastery stolen by relational noise. They learn meditation not to be better partners, but to be better companions to themselves. They revive hobbies not to impress, but to remember who they were before they became products. From this silence, something new is emerging: a post-romantic masculinity. Men who do not hate love, but refuse to pay any price for it. They set non-negotiable boundaries. They reject relationships where their vulnerability is punished. They walk away from bonds demanding endless performance. They choose dignified solitude over company that empties them. This is not bitterness. It is emotional maturity, arriving at the logical conclusion that begging for affection degrades everyone involved. Across the world, small sanctuaries of genuine brotherhood are reappearing, not as echo chambers of resentment, but as spaces where the mask can finally fall. Circles where an engineer can admit that he cries in the car after work, where a doctor confesses he barely sees his children, where a factory worker reveals he prefers the night shift to avoid the contempt he faces at home. They do not gather to complain, but to witness one another's humanity. In an era where deep thought is itself a form of resistance, these men are rediscovering the revolutionary power of sincerity. While millions consume endless reels of distraction to stay comfortably asleep, a small but growing minority is waking into uncomfortable lucidity. They are beginning to see the invisible architecture of emotional capitalism, the way it turns affection into currency and vulnerability into leverage. If you are reading this, if some fragment of these words resonates with an intuition you could never fully name, you are part of that quiet resistance. Riding awake is no longer a slogan, but an act of defiance. It is a declaration that you choose to see what the system prefers you not to. And as men awaken, so do some women. They are beginning to feel the exhaustion of perpetual evaluation, of curating desire and empowerment simultaneously. Many are realizing that they were programmed to become emotional managers of relationships that bring neither joy nor freedom. They are starting to question whether they truly want a man who meets all impossible standards, or simply someone before whom they can let down their guard. The peace that men now seek in solitude is the same peace many women yearn to find in connection: the right to be imperfect without catastrophic consequences. The silent exodus of men may yet prove to be civilization's most unexpected gift, not for what it destroys, but for what it reveals. A relational system built on mutual extraction cannot sustain itself when one of its participants simply stops extracting and being extracted. Like overloaded servers in a network that suddenly collapse, the infrastructure of emotional capitalism begins to fail under the weight of its own demands. The male withdrawal is forcing a systemic reboot that no political revolution ever achieved. Byung-Chul Han reminds us that true revolutions occur not in the streets, but in the collective psyche. When a man chooses his peace over romantic prestige, he performs an act that would have been unthinkable just one generation ago. He declares that his mental health is worth more than his social validation. He prefers to be labeled a failure by the system rather than a success in his own destruction. This inversion of values is seismic. It breaks with millennia of conditioning that equated male worth with the ability to perform, provide, and reproduce. The economic ripples are already visible. The wedding industry has lost tens of billions in the last decade. The suburban housing market trembles because single men no longer buy family-sized homes. Diamond sales have plummeted by 40% among millennials. Each man who opts out of the romantic economy is one less consumer for entire industries built on the myth of endless courtship. Effective capitalism is discovering what every exploitative system eventually learns. When you turn love into labor, workers eventually unionize through abandonment. But the deepest change is not economic. It is existential. We are witnessing the birth of the first post-sacrificial man in history. A man who no longer derives identity from his capacity to provide, protect, or perform. He measures his worth not by how much he produces, but by how much peace he cultivates. Not by how many battles he wins, but by how many he wisely avoids. Not by how long he endures, but by when he chooses to walk away. This new masculinity needs no validation because it has discovered something infinitely more valuable: internal coherence. And women who grasp this transformation are having their own epiphanies. Some admit they spent years demanding emotional openness from men while keeping their own walls intact. Others confess that what they called standards were often impossible equations that no human could solve. The wisest among them see that the perfect man never existed because the same system that promised him also made his existence impossible. You cannot ask for a man to be both strong and endlessly sensitive, traditional and progressive, dominant and submissive. The mathematics of desire collapses under its own contradictions. The future of love between men and women depends on something that seems impossible but is, in fact, inevitable: the death of love as we know it. Not its disappearance, but its metamorphosis into something that has yet to be named. Perhaps it will be an encounter between two solitudes that respect each other. Perhaps it will be complicity against a shared system that oppresses both. Perhaps it will simply be two tired souls who choose to rest together without demands, without performance, without evaluation. Whatever form it takes, one thing is certain: the man who returns to love, if he ever does, will not be the same as the one who left. He will have tasted peace and will not trade it for conditional affection. He will have discovered that chosen solitude is infinitely superior to company purchased with self-degradation. So when you see a man choosing silence over conflict, solitude over attention, stillness over pursuit, do not see failure. You are witnessing the most revolutionary act of the 21st century, a human being refusing to pay for inclusion with his soul. He is not fleeing from love itself, but from the commodified, gamified, optimized parody that late capitalism dares to call love. His retreat is not surrender. It is the only vote left in a democracy of affection where his voice was silenced long ago. The tired man who chooses peace over validation is not your enemy. He is the canary in the coal mine of a civilization that turned the most sacred human encounter, the meeting of two hearts, into an extractive transaction where everyone loses. His exhaustion is the symptom. His withdrawal is the diagnosis. His absence is the message we refuse to decode. Modern love is dead, and we killed it. Yet, as Han reminds us, fatigue can be revolutionary when it becomes collective. Shared burnout can transform into shared awakening. Perhaps we needed to reach this breaking point, where men prefer solitude and women wonder why no one chooses them, to finally see that the problem was never the opposite sex. It was the system that convinced us that love must be earned, optimized, and performed instead of simply lived. Masculinity is not in crisis. It is in metamorphosis. Like the caterpillar that must dissolve completely before becoming a butterfly, the modern man is undergoing a slow liquefaction of identity. What will emerge will not be the patriarch of the past, nor the performative ally of today, but something entirely new. A human being who allows himself to feel without apology, to rest without justification, to love without self-erasure. The women who understand this process, not as abandonment, but as necessary transformation, will be the first to meet these new men. They will not find them on dating apps, in bars, or in gyms, but in spaces not yet colonized by commerce. Places where two conscious solitudes can recognize each other without masks, without algorithms, without judgment. In these encounters, love will cease to be labor and return to play. Vulnerability will no longer be a risk, but a gift. Togetherness will no longer require the sacrifice of individuality. In that world, peace will not be a luxury, but the natural ground of intimacy. Until then, we must learn to honor the deserters. They are the involuntary heroes of a war no one should have been fighting. Every man who chooses peace over the endless relational battlefield is writing, with his absence, the epitaph of a system that turned love into an algorithm and the heart into a KPI. The quietest revolution in human history is unfolding right now. In millions of rooms where men, exhausted beyond language, switch off their phones, delete the apps, and discover that silence sounds like freedom. The return of love will come, but only after everything we mistook for love has died. Because love, in its truest form, cannot survive as labor. It cannot live where everything must justify itself through productivity. It cannot breathe where affection is measured, optimized, and marketed. Love begins only where measurement ends. Han would tell us that genuine intimacy requires opacity, the sacred right not to be fully known, not to be transparent, not to be decoded. In transparency, the mystery that sustains desire evaporates. Capitalism, obsessed with visibility, killed the erotic by turning every secret into content. The erotic lives in what is withheld, not what is displayed. The digital age, promising connection, has annihilated depth. To scroll endlessly is to never truly see. And so, the man who withdraws from the performance is not broken. He is restoring mystery. In silence, he reclaims what cannot be quantified. His solitude is not loneliness, is sacred space, a refusal to let algorithms dictate his heart. For perhaps the next evolution of love will emerge not from dating apps or self-help gurus, but from the stillness of those who refuse to play the game. He is not disappearing from the world. He is re-entering it on his own terms. His rejection of the romantic marketplace is a spiritual act, a small, private rebellion that, multiplied by millions, reshapes the collective consciousness. The most subversive word a man can utter today is no. No, I will not perform my emotions for metrics. No, I will not compete for affection. No, I will not trade my peace for connection. This no is not nihilism. It is the seed of renewal. Every revolution begins with refusal. Every resurrection begins with death. What dies now is not love itself, but its commodified shadow. From its ashes may rise a new kind of encounter, one not between identities, but between presences, where the man no longer needs to prove his worth, and the woman no longer needs to manage the relationship, where silence can coexist with speech, and rest can coexist with passion, where love is no longer a performance, but a form of being. In this vision, the man and the woman cease to be actors in a marketplace of affection and become witnesses to each other's humanity. The metrics fall away. The algorithms starve. The noise fades. And what remains is what has always been the essence of love, the quiet recognition, I see you. The journey toward that future begins with solitude. In a culture terrified of silence, the man who sits quietly with himself is a revolutionary. The man who no longer begs to be seen begins to truly see. The man who no longer fears being alone discovers that solitude is not the opposite of love, but its foundation. So let the system interpret his absence as failure. Let the culture call him lost. For in truth, he has found something our civilization has forgotten, the sacred dignity of stillness. He is not hiding from women. He is hiding from noise. He is not afraid of intimacy. He is afraid of its counterfeit version. He is not abandoning love. He is rescuing it. And when love returns, purified by absence. It will be unrecognizable. It will not arrive through swipes or algorithms, but through silence. It will not promise happiness, but peace. It will not demand performance, but presence. Until then, the world will continue to misread his withdrawal as weakness, his quiet as emptiness, his solitude as defeat. But those who can see beyond the surface will understand. His silence is not escape, it is prophecy. Because in that silence lies the blueprint for the next evolution of human connection. One not built on extraction, validation, or optimization, but on being. A love that asks nothing, measures nothing, sells nothing. A love that, once again, is sacred because it is free. And so, in millions of rooms across the planet, men are unknowingly composing the first manifesto of a post-capitalist love. Not with words, but with absence. Not with protest, but with peace. Not with noise, but with the profound eloquence of refusal. This is how revolutions begin, not in chaos, but in stillness. Not with shouting, but with silence. Not with desire, but with the decision to stop feeding what destroys. Love will return, but not as transaction. It will return as truth. It will return as presence. It will return when we finally remember that to love is not to perform, but simply to be.